It sparked protests and social media campaigns. The case of a judge accused of sexual misconduct. But the U.S. president is standing by his Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh. Donald Trump actually thinks the controversy could be a vote winner. So how will it affect the upcoming midterm elections? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. The Brett Kavanaugh case has divided America. Donald Trump's pick for a lifetime job on the top U.S. court is accused of sexual misconduct. There was already a lot at stake. Kavanaugh's appointment would likely tip the Supreme Court to the right, with huge implications for a whole range of social, cultural, and political issues. But there may be more immediate consequences at next month's midterm elections. Allegations that the judge sexually assaulted a student while at college have prompted angry protests, with claims Kavanaugh is not fit to sit on America's highest court. If that translates into votes in the November poll, it could swing Congress to the Democrats, undercutting Trump's legislative agenda. The controversy has prompted one former Supreme Court justice who initially backed Kavanaugh's nomination to change his mind. John Paul Stevens now says Kavanaugh might not have the right temperament for the job.
His performance during the hearings caused me to change my mind. I think there's several commentators, Larry Tribe among them, who's a constitutional law professor at Harvard, have written pieces in which they suggest that he has demonstrated a potential bias involving enough potential litigants before the court that he would not be able to perform his full responsibilities. And I think there's merit in that criticism, and that the senators should really pay attention to it for the good of the court.
So just how did we get here? In July, Donald Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh to replace a retiring Supreme Court justice. Last month, accusations against Kavanaugh by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford surfaced in a Washington Post article. She accused him of sexually assaulting her at a college party in the early 1980s. Both Ford and Kavanaugh testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Ford detailed her claims. Kavanaugh denied them. The White House then gave the FBI 1 week to investigate. The agency's report was sent to the White House and the Senate. Republicans are pressing ahead, hoping to get Kavanaugh installed before next month's midterm elections. All right, now to our panel of guests in Washington, D.C. Jeff Hauser, Executive Director of the Revolving Door Project at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. Rina, Shah, a conservative commentator and Republican strategist and consultant. And John Neffinger, a Democratic strategist and former communications director at the Democratic National Committee. Welcome to you all, and thanks for joining us today. John, let me start with you. What does it say about the damage this may have done or may do to the reputation of the Supreme Court that former Justice John Paul Stevens now says Judge Kavanaugh might not have the right temperament for the job?
Yeah, Mohammed, the Supreme Court has always been political, but it's important for the credibility of the court, for the integrity of really our entire system of government, that we be able to see them as, our Supreme Court justices, as people who do aspire to look beyond partisan fights and uphold a higher vision of the law. What Justice Kavanaugh did at his hearing last week, literally threatening Democratic senators, saying what comes around goes around, it is unprecedented, unbelievable, accusing Democrats of taking revenge for the Clintons. It really does politicize the court in a way that I don't think we've ever seen before. Now, trust in government is a more sacred thing for Democrats in general. They are the party that believes the government should be able to get things done, whereas Republicans, since Ronald Reagan, have been dining out on this idea that that government can't get anything done. So in a sense, there's a larger benefit to the larger Republican project. But just in terms of the integrity of our court and the integrity of our government, it could do immense damage.
Rina, had Republicans or President Trump withdrawn this nomination, would this fight, from your perspective, still be playing out the way that it is?
It most certainly wouldn't. Look, when Justice Gorsuch was going through this very same process, Democrats supported him. We know 3 Democrats went through and voted for him, and he had no such allegations of sexual misconduct arise. I don't think it's too much to ask Republicans in the Senate to put forth and vote for somebody that doesn't have these allegations against him, such as Judge Kavanaugh. Look, this goes back to a problem here of the boys will be boys thing, and it's something that's sort of arisen because of the Me Too movement here in the United States. The actions that Judge Kavanaugh is being alleged to have partaken in are from when he was a teen and when he was a collegiate, a young college guy at Yale, of all places. So this is something I'm really very saddened to see play out this way. In 2018, I thought we would believe women and that we would probably put forth someone else.
Jeff, regardless of how this is playing out publicly, privately, how concerned are Republican lawmakers about Judge Kavanaugh's temperament?
Unfortunately, I think the bulk of them may not be that concerned. I think that Brett Kavanaugh was chosen by Donald Trump to be a partisan figure. The fact that Brett Kavanaugh was partisan was not revealed for the first time last week. This is a man who was one of the senior lieutenants to Ken Starr in the 1990s when Bill Clinton, the impeachment effort against Bill Clinton was underway. He's someone who was involved in the contested presidential election of 2000 as a lawyer. He's been involved in partisan fights with Democrats for more than 20 years in Washington, D.C. And President Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh knowing that there are potential constitutional crises coming down the line with the Robert Mueller special prosecution of Trump and his ties to Russia in the 2016 election and various other fights. And Trump put up Brett Kavanaugh to be a partisan ally. And I think the vast majority of Republican senators were fine with that. And his nomination looked like it was going to pass up and until these allegations arose. And of course, it still may.
All right, President Trump clearly doesn't think any of this will hurt his party's chances in November. In fact, he believes the controversy will actually benefit the Republicans. He tweeted, "The harsh and unfair treatment of Judge Brett Kavanaugh is having an incredible upward impact on voters. The people get it far better than the politicians. Most importantly, this great life cannot be ruined by mean and despicable Democrats and totally uncorroborated allegations." Rina, let me ask you, what do you think when you hear that? I mean, at the beginning of this saga, President Trump seemed to be, by his standard, somewhat restrained. He'd even said that the testimony that was offered by Dr. Blasey Ford was credible. Now you see this onslaught, you see this mockery, and you see tweets like this. What does that say about where this process is?
Well, number one, nobody should be surprised at the fact that he mocked a woman who's alleging that she was assaulted sexually. It's a very, very low and despicable moment for the state of public affairs in this country when we see this happening. But when he was a candidate, he mocked a disabled reporter. So while I'm saddened by it, I'm not surprised. I will say this, the president, when he was a candidate and into the time he took the Oval Office, to this day, has nearly 20 allegations of sexual misconduct against him. Clearly, he does not respect women. American voters who voted for President Trump know this. They have no problem with it. They have no problem with his misogyny more than anything else. And so when he took to the rally pulpit last week and mocked her, it was a moment where he sort of mobilized his base to say, midterm elections matter to us, get out and express how angry you are with how this innocent man has been treated. The phrase that the right is using right now, particularly women on the right, are saying that Kavanaugh was not given due process. What they are forgetting is that Senate Judiciary Committee hearings are not a court of law. And while they say they believe Dr. Ford, they're not sure that she was able to corroborate and essentially prove that it was Brett Kavanaugh who assaulted her. And that's what President Trump railed against, saying that she basically could not be trusted and wasn't credible, whereas just a few days prior, he had tweeted saying she was credible. He's a flip-flopper.
John, there are Democratic lawmakers who have been suggesting that Judge Kavanaugh may have perjured himself, not just in this round of testimony, but in previous rounds of testimony for the confirmation of other judges.
Yeah.
If there is this blue wave in November, if Democrats were to retake the House and possibly even the Senate, even though there's a much narrower path to that, and many are saying it's unlikely.
Sure.
Do you believe that Democratic lawmakers would try to open more investigations into Judge Kavanaugh and possibly even have him impeached.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think the likelihood of him being impeached in this climate, in the sense, sorry, impeachment is a funny term, and this comes up with President Trump and now with Judge Kavanaugh, because the vote to impeach, to get the process underway, I think very well could happen, because I think the Democratic base would demand it of people. This is not just a political moment anymore. This is a cultural moment. We have, depending on whose stats you believe, something like 40 million American women who've been the victim of sexual violence. And so this is personal in a way that we don't see most political issues playing out. So yes, I do think he has given lots of testimony that conflicts with documentary evidence. I do think you could see that pursued, although because of the tribalism that we see, no matter how big this blue wave is, mathematically you're going to need Republicans in the Senate to be able to actually remove someone, whether it's Kavanaugh or Trump, from office. And I don't see that necessarily happening very easily, although, you know, with conclusive proof of lying, maybe you could pry a couple of Republicans off too.
Jeff, let me ask you, when it comes to the midterms, do you see all this playing more favorably to the advantage of the Democrats at this point or the Republicans?
I think the conventional wisdom is that it's going to be mixed, and it sort of depends on the nature of the race and who are the key voters. Republicans have been saying since this began that their base is enthusiastic and that there's going to be higher turnout. I don't think Democrats were expecting to win because Republicans failed to vote. I think Democrats were expecting to win because their base, which tends to not vote in midterm elections, tends to only vote in presidential elections, was in fact excited. So I think you're going to see both bases performing well. The big question remains, how is this going to be seen by those voters who maybe are traditionally Republican but are turned off by Trump? And I would think that ultimately speaking, those more moderate Republican voters are going to potentially vote Democratic now because Brett Kavanaugh is underscoring the qualms they may have about Donald Trump as a person, and because he personifies so many of the same problems with treating women not only respectfully, but avoiding physical assault. So I think in the end, it might help Democrats, but Republicans are certainly claiming to the contrary, and I don't know that we know 1 month from now how it'll play out.
Rina, last week there was this incredibly dramatic 5 or 6 minutes of video that captured Senator Jeff Flake being cornered in that elevator by these 2 women who were sexual assault survivors. What I'm curious about is, at that point, Jeff Flake indicated that he was going to vote to confirm Brett Kavanaugh. And then after that, he called for this FBI investigation. Do you believe that it was the fact that that was captured on video that really changed the calculus of where he stood in all of this?
I do agree with that, because when lawmakers see the real, I guess you can say more than anything else, the attention that social media tends to give to these important decisions in a way that there was not before, there's some degree of change there. And what he did was call for the FBI investigation and said he couldn't really move forward without that happening. But look, he's a political animal as well. He's not running for re-election. So in my gut, I know that Jeff Flake knows that he can make these tough choices and he doesn't have anything to lose. But this is how our system works. So what he did was essentially give himself cover to vote yes, to say that there was an investigation and that this investigation brought forth pretty much nothing, which is what we're hearing from Senator Grassley, the head of the committee. And so it gives them cover to essentially vote yes on Kavanaugh because something was done. And that's really all that moment did. I was hoping for a little bit more, but even to get to that point, the pressures that come from having been captured on video, I think got to him. But again, in the end, made him make a political decision that I don't think moved the needle very much.
John, what about the fact that there have been these really large protests in Washington, D.C.? I mean, there were these huge protests in the Hart Senate building on Thursday, where there were hundreds, if not thousands, of women that were confronting senators, men as well. Yeah. Do you think that lawmakers in Washington have been completely surprised by the outpouring when it comes to this, by the emotion involved, by the number of protesters that have been confronting them? Or do you think that they've been expecting this more and more, considering how all of this is really dividing along partisan lines?
Well, I hope so, because I went down and protested on Monday and got myself arrested doing this too. I think there is an unusual moment. That's the first time in my life that I've done anything like that. And I think that you see more and more people stepping up and saying this is just not okay, for various different reasons, many of them very personal. And I think you saw that come through with the video of the women at the elevators, the survivors there. And I do think that there is this human outpouring of emotion and this human-to-human connection that is at least letting the senators know that even if they do go ahead and make their political calculations the same way they would have without it, that there's going to be, this is going to last in the American memory, that this is going to be a moment that's not just a political moment. And the Republican Party right now is in danger of defining itself as the party of sex criminals for a generation. Obviously, Democrats have not been totally innocent in that area in the past, but they're making strides to get rid of that. And the Republican Party now, as we see with Donald Trump, doubling down on this guy who he himself admitted was very credible, is essentially embracing this very old patriarchal attitude that certainly next generations of voters, young voters, are not okay with at all.
Jeff, what about this FBI investigation? I mean, were you surprised that at the last minute it was actually called for?
I was not surprised that it was called for, because it always represented a kind of obvious way for the center of the Senate to neither immediately vote no or yes. And the U.S. Senate always likes to prefer to postpone decisions. And so the FBI investigation was a logical thing for the voters in the center to demand. What's been very disappointing is that their demand was far too vague. It was an FBI investigation at the direction of President Trump himself, as the other guests have pointed out, credibly accused of sexual assault. And as you might imagine, Trump did not tell the FBI to actually talk to the witnesses who could have corroborated Deborah Ramirez and Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's allegations. So there is an absence of top-level corroborating evidence, but it's because the FBI was expressly told to not find that evidence. So unfortunately, the FBI investigation, which was a reasonable step, turned out to not be a real investigation. And as a result, it's really just a sham. That's a shame. And I wish that the people who had called for it a week ago had been much more specific when they had made that call.
Rina, what about Republican voters in the United States right now? I mean, are they split along, is it along gender lines right now? Is it the never-Trumpers and those that are for Trump? I mean, where does this put the Republican voter when it comes to the midterms, what's been going on when it comes to Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation?
Well, many would argue that Never Trump has been dead, and I've been part of that movement since day one, having been called the poster girl for it when I lost my delegate seat for speaking out against the current president. However, look, here's the thing. There is a faction of the Republican Party that has given in to everything that the president says. They believe that everything he's saying is truth. That is the MAGA faction, and they will do anything to support him. Anything he says is again, like I said, propped up as truth. And so there is another set of us that is concerned about the future of democracy, worried about this partisanship that marks this era of politics in Washington. And we just hope that there would be principled leaders who could stand up. We had hoped we'd find them in Lindsey Graham, in Jeff Flake, in Susan Collins, in Lisa Murkowski. But at the end of the day, these are political animals who have to run for re-election. And people do like their seats. I'm a proponent of term limits. I don't know how many Republicans at this very moment support that. But what it does indicate to me, this current climate, is that Republicans who support the president feel that Judge Kavanaugh is being wronged. And they are worried about their sons, I've heard, as I've talked to many Republican women, about them being falsely accused. I think it's a bunch of malarkey. I think that Judge Kavanaugh should have been withdrawn, and that was where we should have left it.
Sorry to have interrupted you. I thought you were done there, Rina. John, you heard Rina just mention term limits, and that actually brings me to my next question, because there are more and more people in the U.S. that are expressing an opinion that Supreme Court justices should not be appointed for life. And there are lawmakers that have espoused that view as well. Is there any chance that in the coming few years, in the coming few decades, from your point of view, there could be a movement or there could be lawmakers that could come to some sort of bipartisan consensus that would try to limit the terms for Supreme Court justices?
Bipartisan consensus is very elusive these days, I think. But then again, the idea that Donald Trump would be in the White House was inconceivable a couple of years ago. And I do think that that there's going to be a very serious conversation now about the makeup of the court, because as we talked about before, it's not going to be seen as legitimate the way it is, especially with this guy on it, if he ends up on it. But in general, I think both parties have real difficulty with the confirmation process right now. Nobody is enjoying what's going on in Washington right now, and it clearly doesn't make sense or inspire confidence in our Supreme Court or our judiciary in general. And so I do think you're going to see a real conversation. What form that takes, what proposals come out, I think is a little premature to say yet. But yeah, the very existence and functioning of the Supreme Court there is now in serious question the way it works.
Jeff, this is playing out 27 years after Anita Hill's testimony. This is playing out during the Me Too era. I mean, what does it say about the state of play in the United States that this is happening right now?
I mean, you can look at it, you can be optimistic or you can be pessimistic. The optimist would point out that most polls show either more people believe Dr. Blasey Ford, as I do, than Judge Kavanaugh, or it's tied. But I think the consensus is most people believe Dr. Blasey Ford. And that was not the case in 1991. At the time, a strong majority supported Clarence Thomas, and he was ultimately confirmed with the support of the American people. If Kavanaugh is to be confirmed in 2018, he's going to be confirmed basically because the Republicans just listen to their base, which is a diminishing minority of Americans. So it basically says that there's been progress, but that progress has many, many more miles to go, that we need much more progress. We need to believe women, and we're not there fully as a society. Powerful institutions do not believe women, but some progress has been made. So I would caution against being too pessimistic or too optimistic.
Rina, we only have about 2 minutes left here, so please just be mindful of that. How much has all this done damage to the credibility of the Supreme Court? And how much has all of this done damage to the credibility of the Senate?
I think the trust that younger Americans will have in our institutions is going to greatly diminish after these midterm elections. There's just no refuting that, because when we see peaceful protests that has happened many times since President Trump took office, and the gains don't seem to be made, that really erodes the trust of millennials like myself, where we believe that when you elect somebody to represent you, they take all facts into consideration. When we look at what seems to be a good old boys club, and remains as such in 2018, where we're making great strides in other fields. Women overwhelmingly are more educated than men in the United States, have higher degrees rather, and we've taken a place in the workforce that is so different, but we don't see that reflected. Women are underrepresented in today's U.S. Congress. The numbers are so bleak. And so I think to both men and women, it will make sense that why should we trust these institutions if they don't change for us when we get out and we peacefully protest and we vote? So there at some point will be a shakeup.
All right, we have run out of time. So thanks to all our guests, Jeff Hauser, Rina Shah, and John Neffinger. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.